Well, new concerns are raised in the ongoing investigation of how a man got on board a plane with explosives strapped to his underpants on Christmas Day. One of the questions that keeps coming up is why weren't there air marshals on that flight? The bomb plot on the Detroit-bound Northwest flight failed, thank goodness, but not because of U.S. security efforts. In fact, it was because the bomber wasn't able to ignite the bomb and because of the courage of fellow passengers and crew. So what happened to the trained air marshal plan that was put in place after 9/11? Joining me now is Jamie Smith, the former air marshal and the president and CEO of security group SCG International. Great to have you back on, Jamie. Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Good to be with you again.
Maybe you can explain to all of us, had there been air marshals on Christmas Day on that foiled terror attack flight, how would the situation have been handled differently?
Well, if the air marshals had been on the flight, the marshal would have interdicted the passenger earlier. But the real issue is that air marshals are also on the ground. And if the marshal was on the ground before the plane departed, he would have been observing the passengers and probably would have noticed this interaction taking place between the Mutalab and this Indian gentleman that was taken into custody for a brief moment. And he might have noticed something in advance and never allowed him to get on the plane in the first place through behavioral profiling.
Air marshals usually fly in pairs, and according to a Department of Homeland Security spokesperson, they are trained to operate covertly and to blend in with the traveling public. So that kind of makes you think that they don't necessarily act as a deterrent if no one knows they're there. Isn't that part of the process in order to make people think twice before trying to pull anything on a plane, knowing that the air marshals are on board?
That's right. It's like the old game show where you've got what's behind door number one, what's behind door number two. You know, if you've got a marshal on the plane, you don't know whether you have one on the plane or not. And so that's the unknown that the terrorist has to face. And, you know, in this case, there should have been a marshal on the plane. There ought to be marshals on every plane that enters the United States from a foreign port. You know, this is not a failure of the marshal's service per se, but it is more a failure of, you know, the ground personnel that didn't interdict the passenger in the first place. And, you know, we've heard a lot of people talk about the need for screening passengers and profiling passengers, but they're talking about racial profiling in many cases. And I heard one commentator say that you need to profile every Muslim male, but we don't need to do that because we need the Muslim community to work with us on this. So you need behavioral profiling.
Here's what I think is frustrating for a lot of Americans and anyone who's ever boarded a plane, which is pretty much the majority of our viewers right now. Every time there's a terror scare, okay, immediately after, then all of a sudden there's these stricter measures that were put in place, like after the shoe bomber attempt to blow up an airliner. We were all told to take our shoes off. We thought it'd be temporary. It has stuck. So now you can't get through security without taking off your shoes. And that was put in place because of the shoe bomber. Then Abdul Muttalib tries to set off a bomb upon landing in Detroit just moments before landing. So now passengers are being restricted to leave their seats 1 hour before standing and landing. So in other words, the last hour of your flight, whether you got to go to the bathroom or not, you got to stay put in your seats. I'm not really sure if maybe you can explain to me what kind of difference that makes to not allow passengers to roam in the bathrooms and so forth at the end of the flight, but yet they can mid-flight. And what difference does that make? Does it?
Well, I mean, the logic behind it is that you're going to control the movement of the passenger and therefore the crew can see what they're doing. But it really is another knee-jerk reaction. It has no effect in terms of practical measures for security.
Yeah,
because
I don't think
all
so.
you got, no, it doesn't do a thing. And, you know, you're telling somebody don't get up an hour before. Okay, great. If I'm a bad guy, then I'm going to get up an hour and 10 minutes, you know, before.
And you obviously can't tell the passengers you don't get to go to the bathroom. I mean, you know, what's next? You know, are they so in other words, you can't really implement much in the air. It's got to be implemented on the ground. Once the plane's taken off, you know, it's pretty much the security is over as far as I'm concerned. I mean, Muttalib packed these explosives in his underwear, and only really an invasive pat-down would have discovered what he was hiding, and until those proper body screening devices are installed at every airport, which they are not, God only knows why, after so many years after 9/11, how do you prevent someone else from doing the same right now?
Well, I mean, we had you know, it was a running joke because of all of those security measures that were taking place about, you know, you can't take liquids, you have to take your shoes off. we joked a couple of years ago that, well, what's going to happen next? Somebody's going to bring in something in their underwear and we're all going to have to fly naked. And, that's essentially what we've got right now with the silly rules that have been put into place. But, the security aviation security is a layered approach where you have multiple concentric layers of security that give you this opportunities to screen out people that don't need to be on the plane. And you're exactly right that once you're in the air at 35,000 feet, you do not need to have to solve a problem at that moment because they're...
Well, no, I'm just, what I want to know is why is there Monday morning quarterbacking going on when it comes to preventing terror attacks in this country?
Well, because there's a lack of leadership at TSA. One of the things that was also joked around about was that TSA stood for thousands standing around. And it's not the fault of the men and the women on the ground at TSA. It's a lack of leadership. And they rely too much on technology and not enough on the actual individual. And that's where the difference between U.S. security and Israeli security comes into place.
Oh, yeah.
There have been those about... We've been saying since 2005, you need to have more federal trained personnel in place, much like you have at immigration when you come back into the United States, where you actually have eye contact with a passenger and you're talking to the passenger and asking them questions and looking for telltale signs of someone that does not need to be on the airplane. You don't want to rely on a metal detector that's going to detect, it's not going to detect explosive material put into plastic containers. It's not going to work. And then if you're not talking to the person, you'll never know to give them a secondary search.
Yeah, and this sort of stuff doesn't get pulled off easily or at all. I mean, I don't remember the last time I heard of a story like this out of Tel Aviv airport, that's for sure. And America's been struck, and I don't understand why we're still talking about this and why there aren't stricter guidelines in place. Air marshals certainly would be a help, and they're not on every flight.
Yeah, but, I think part of the problem is that we focus as a country on, well, the air marshal. But the air marshal, again, that's the last resort. That's like putting a Patriot missile system in place to shoot down a missile when it's taken off. You need to stop the missile before it ever fires in the first place. We need to be stopping these people before. We've got tied lists, we've got watch lists, we've got no-fly lists. We've got all of the security measures that we could use, but they're not being used. They're not being used effectively. You're not trained. You don't have solidly trained personnel, standing there screening passengers. We've got people that have just signed up for a job, but they don't get the proper training. They're not selected carefully enough. And, I think you guys had on a TSA employee earlier today, and she said the very same thing, that there have been so many breaches because of the TSA's lack of leadership and lack of effective security measures. This is going to happen again. It's just a matter of time. We've been lucky so far.
All right. Jamie Smith, always great to talk to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good holiday and go Ole Miss.
Yeah. All right. See you. Thanks.